Hey, Stewart. Thank you so much for connecting today. I would love if you could kick us off by just telling me your name and tell me a little bit more about MacroCycle. Do your pitch for me. Who are you? What are you about?
Taylor, it is my pleasure and my honor to be here. So, my name is Stwart Peña Feliz. I am the CEO and co-founder of MacroCycle Technologies, the venture creating circular plastics and textiles at price parity. My background is in chemical engineering. I started my career at ExxonMobil, and I was fortunate while I was there to have my last position be overseeing the operations of what eventually became the first recycling facility within ExxonMobil battery limits. That was my
Wow.
introduction to plastic recycling in the oil and gas industry, and I like to say that I saw the truth, the reality of the industry. I decided to pivot away entirely from the industry, and eventually I made my way over to MIT, where I had the honor and pleasure of meeting my now co-founder, Dr. Jan George Rosenboom. When I first met him, I thought his technology was too good to be true, so I wanted to work with him to show him how things work in the real world, only for me to realize his technology was really true and really good. This month is our 3-year anniversary since we've met. And since then, we've been working together on making MacroCycle what it is today.
That is amazing. I think you've probably said that a couple times before, Stewart. I'm not totally sure, but it
My
sounds like
first
you've
rodeo.
practiced it. So I'm curious, you talked about your journey with Exxon. Outside of your time with Exxon, I'm just curious about your interest in circularity, your interest in plastics, your interest in sustainability. Kind of how did all of this come together for you? So I hear you talk about how you saw the light in some ways, you saw what was actually happening when it comes to recycling, but tell me a little bit more about your journey and why you're really interested in this sort of work.
So I'll be fully transparent in saying I kind of stumble upon circularity and recycling. This has never been my passion until now that I started working on it. To give you a little bit more of my history as to why I'm in the space, I think it's fair to say when I was a kid, there was a time that I remember waking up from a nap as a young kid, 5, 6, or 7, in my parents' arm, and it was dark. The power had gone out, and we were outside just with the moon, shining upon us for the only light that we had. And I remember waking up and seeing my parents a little bit worried. And once they noticed I was awake, they like just, started entertaining me and all this stuff. And I remember telling them at that point in time that one day I will solve our power issues. Because from where
Mm,
I'm from, the Dominican Republic, there's an unreliable grid infrastructure where the power would go out on a daily basis.
yeah.
Fast forward, so I told them that I was going to do that and I wanted to become an engineer to solve that. Fast forward to high school, I fell in love with chemistry and chemistry, math, engineering. Of course, I had to be a chemical engineer.
Yeah.
Went into college and became a chemical engineer. I truly didn't know what chemical engineering did, but I knew that it was energy related. And given my passion from as a kid, I wanted to be at an energy company, which eventually led me to be at ExxonMobil because I wanted to learn how energy worked at a global scale.
Mhm.
That way I could learn from that and create an impact myself. And then my last role, as I mentioned, I was the engineer for the unit that happened to first feed plastic waste for circularity purposes.
Yeah.
That was my introduction to plastic recycling. But I'll be transparent. I didn't leave ExxonMobil thinking that I wanted to do plastic recycling.
Yeah.
I left ExxonMobil with a mindset of like, okay, I see the reality now. I want to do
Mhm.
something different. I want to create a better world, a better organization, and so on. And when I came to MIT, I was actually looking for a lot of energy generation types
Mhm.
of technologies, hydrogen and solar and so on. And like that was more of my interest. And then I met my co-founder. And then I started talking to him. And then I started realizing that I had a lot of personal experience from that.
Yeah.
I also started remembering how when I traveled to the Dominican Republic as an adult, the same beaches that I would go to that were beautiful and crystal
Mm.
clear and blue now had plastic waste and crocs all over it. And there was a little bit of that passion and calling of like, I can still create a positive impact in my homeland through this technology. But it was more of like, I was the right person at the right time that met my co-founder, and I saw an opportunity for me to create an impact on the climate.
Totally.
Even if energy was my passion, my underlying mission was to create a better planet and environment for all of us. And this one is a massive problem that
That's true. And it's such a good call out too, because I think, for a lot of my Bard MBA fellow entrepreneurial students, there's this idea that you've got this path and you got to find the path, and that it exists somewhere, and really you're just trying to pull it out, and then you'll be on it, rather than kind of taking things as they come, which is what I'm hearing you say. It's like you knew a couple of big rocks. One of them is that you want to make sure that you're thoughtful and passionate about how the issues that you're working on relate to your home community. And then the other side of that is around how can I use the talents that I have, the interests that I have, and plug them immediately in where I can see the most value. So I think it's a really cool way of flipping it from kind of the anxiety producing path, right, that we all have to find. I've thought a lot about this course that we're in. It's called Innovation, and I've thought a lot about how we also put a quite a bit amount of pressure on ourselves as entrepreneurs or innovators to create something completely new from scratch, where it's like we got to come up with like what Steve Jobs did. Like that's what we're going for, right? And I've found that through a lot of conversation and thinking that really you're tweaking this system. You're not completely revolutionizing, creating something completely different. You're taking something that exists and you're tweaking it to be better for the environment, better for people, better, even if it's just for cost parity. So I'm curious if you could react to that for me. Do you agree that that's sort of how innovators could think, is more like tweaking the system? And if so, what sort of tweaks do you think MacroCycle is making to already existing structures and systems?
Hmm. That's a great question. So I'm gonna unfortunately have to cheat by saying yes
Cheat.
and no.
Okay.
It is true that the best changes are partial tweaks or partial innovations. It's not a complete revamp of the system. But what I think people underestimate is how that partial tweak is an innovation breakthrough on its own
Mm,
that takes a lot. So the best way I can think about it, for example, is like Google. Google was not the first search engine. But what did they break through? On the advertisement model that
yeah.
allowed them to take off. Or you have similar examples with MySpace and then Facebook and so on, where it's often not the case where you have first mover advantage by being the first one in the market. So how is MicroCycle trying to leverage that history of
Yeah.
knowledge in order for us to be able to overcome the challenges? Well, we've been able to learn a lot from our predecessors, those that are still alive and those that have failed. And we have come to a really big conclusion that there is just a very difficult market to commercialize technology because it's capital intensive and a
Hmm.
commoditized product
Mm,
with very heterogeneous feedstocks, which makes
yeah.
it very challenging. So when we were starting to think of how microcycle came in, originally our breakthrough innovation, like the little tweak was, well, everyone was breaking the bonds of the polymer to remake them. My co-founder decided, what if instead of breaking it, we just made more new bonds? And instead of going backwards in the supply chain, he took an approach that essentially takes it forward. But that was one step on the many numerous steps. You still need to remove the impurities. You still need to remove the color. You still need to give it the proper form factor. So I will say that microcycle's key breakthrough that allows us to even get out of the lab was 1 out of 4, if no more steps, at least 4 steps. So it was a little tweak on that part of the process that allows us to basically be able to get to the lab. Now that we are a little more established, now we're trying to improve on all the different areas, but it's not necessarily like we have a ground, like we have to start from fresh, start from anew. It's just what is being done today, what can we do better? How can we improve it? And that's what I will say, that we are very lucky we're standing on the shoulders of giants, but we're hoping to become even bigger giants down the line.
That's right.
So with what your analysis had led you to, I do agree, but I think it's also fair to say that we cannot underestimate how breakthrough that little tweak has to be in order for those companies to be successful.
Yeah, totally. Can I just dig in a little bit more? I'm curious about the capital intensity side, especially for your model. Sounds like still you're in that space. So how do you think about getting over that? One of the things that I was thinking about is just getting early buy-in and maybe some like early contracts from some really big names. Like maybe that's part of it. Sort of how have you navigated getting over that initial capital expenditure and all of
That would be nice if that was as easy as.
that?
You're correct. In plastics, it is capital intensive. The first breakthrough or the first hurdle that we overcome is that our capital intensive nature is a lot lighter. While our
Mm,
competitors need to invest $10,000 per ton of production in capex, we are seeing that at an equivalent scale, we are around $2,000 per ton or lower. That 80% reduction makes it a lot easier to be able to source a capital, but not
yeah.
necessarily easy. Second one is definitely getting traction. Unfortunately, in this market, in a commoditized environment, very few players are willing to give offtake agreements or LOIs. So that
Yeah.
definitely is a very difficult thing to accomplish. But then what MacroCycle did is that we just innovated on the business model. We reflected on our IP and we realized that we are a process innovation only company, not an equipment innovation. What that means is we do not need any new equipment for us to be able to implement our
Mm,
process, which theoretically translates to everything that we need at scale is already available at scale. As a result, we have now adopted a tolling business model where we're going to be scaling up by renting the pieces of equipment from other companies and entities that already have them. That way, we can scale up all the way to industrial scale without us having to purchase the capex so we can reach a stage of technology maturity, validation, and customers offtake agreements so we can then go out there and get the capital stack required to build our first
your
plant.
own. Yeah. Wow. Brilliant. So exciting.
Gotta get creative.
Um, I know. It's really fun to hear how you've tweaked along the way too, not just with your initial idea, but you're just getting feedback constantly and iterating. Um, so curious what I mean, before we hopped on the recording, we talked about how many late nights you've had. What's keeping you excited? What's the thing that within this industry or the opportunities that you have, like what continues to keep you motivated and tinkering?
That's a hard question because I think it's more internal than external. The
Yeah.
reality is anyone that knows this space doesn't have a bright we know that there's not a bright future. We have to build a bright future. There's not
Mm,
tailwinds per se that are pushing us to a brighter tomorrow. We're navigating this storm. From the policy side of things, you hear here and there a new few bills being, proposed and so on. But like even if they get implemented, nothing's gonna happen in the next 5 years, hopefully in the next 10 years. Brands don't want to pay a cent over for recycled material. Oil's still going to be pumped at a massive amount, discounting the price of petrochemicals, therefore plastics. The reality is that many people do not have an external motivation as to why they're doing this. It's mostly internal. And part of it is I do want to create a future that my children can enjoy as much as I did.
mm,
That might not be the case for the Dominican Republic, given a lot of the waste that is now, hitting our waters locally and so on. But at least I gotta believe that our kids can have an opportunity. I have reflected a lot on this journey because you kind of have to be optimistic
yeah.
in this space. And I, through this research, read a quote. I forget how it went by exactly, but it was during the civil rights movement where a people of color were talking among each other, and some people were saying, like, what's the point of us trying if nothing's going to change within our lifetime?
Mm,
And someone communicated back of like, you're right, maybe within our lifetime or within a children's lifetime, but we gotta believe that our grandchildren at least have a chance and their grandchildren and so on. And we're setting that foundation for the future. That's the perspective that I'm taking of like, I'm not doing this for myself, climate wise, at least financially, I gotta survive.
yeah. 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 Yeah.
And out of all the jobs I could be doing, this is the most fun one. But from a climate perspective, from like a perseverance perspective, I'm doing this because I truly want to leave a legacy behind for the future generations where they're able to smile as much as I did, enjoying this world the way that I did.
Well, you gave me chills. I appreciate that quote. Yeah, it's been an interesting time in policy, in just being in my MBA. It's been an interesting time to be able to actively look at the case studies, and you're constantly reevaluating why you care about what you care about. If you're me, anyway, and making sure that you've got really good answers to some of those questions. So I appreciate the way you think about it. One piece of this that I feel like you've already touched on several times, um, one of the things that we think about in the Bard program is how to bring in voices that maybe aren't always at the table when we're thinking about circularity, when we're thinking about innovation. And I think you've already described, at least for your home community, how you're thinking about this. But I'm curious if there are other communities or voices that you think, specifically when it comes to plastics, aren't always at the table, and how, even if MacroCycle isn't doing this directly, but how do you think about bringing those voices in and giving them a voice in that way?
I think the voices that are not being heard enough are the voices that are actually being impacted by this
Mm,
problem. And if you think of it, whether it's the temperatures, fires, or plastic waste, it's always the underrepresented, low socioeconomic status of communities that are the ones that are being impacted the most. And the ones that should be driving change the most, but simply don't have the ability to, the network, the assets, or the money to be able to create that impact. Um, the way that we at MacroCycle are trying to very actively be able to overcome that is by having an extremely diverse team.
mm.
So we have at the moment, me, my co-founder, 7 employees and 2 interns. And among those employees, we have Dominican, Germans, Thai, Mexican, American, Turkish, Singaporean, and Koreans represented among the team.
That's incredible.
That is a pretty diverse group of individuals where we have more languages spoken than people in the company.
Yeah.
And it is something really exciting because we're now giving ourselves the opportunity to be able to tackle problems throughout the world. If we
Mhm.
include the generations of previous interns that we've had, then we also have Haiti, Kenya, Nigeria, China, and maybe 1 or 2 more countries that have been represented through our internship pools. And it comes to the point that, for example, we were doing a research project of like, where could we source international waste if we ever need to? And a lot of those companies are found in Thailand. And my Thai employee told the person that was doing the project of like, let me know if you need me to get on the phone.
Yeah.
And that is how we're maximizing that as many voices can be heard, but that's still
Yeah.
not enough. So as we continue to grow our team, I maximize the probability of having a very healthy and broad and diverse pipeline of candidates
Mhm.
to make sure that when I make future hiring decisions, I am able to make the best decision as to like how do I continue to bring in diverse perspectives. I did forget one country, Italy as well. We have had Italy has been the most
Hey.
representative country in our company history so far.
Wow. Two people? Three?
1 employee and 2 interns.
Wow. That's crazy. That's awesome. What a cool case study. Um, so here's a question. This is my transparent question. Um, I get so excited about MacroCycle. When Eric shared this with me, I looked all into it and I was really fascinated. And I could be wrong, but I think, did you speak at Circularity this past year or no? You did, right? I knew I recognized you. And I remember being really fascinated at the time too. The thing that I wonder is, let's say that you're super successful. And I mean, you already are, but even more. Then what happens is often these organizations like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and others um, would change maybe the way that they're sourcing their original PET. And then now we're thinking about a more circular system. If I'm honest, I would love to see those materials not be plastic in the future, right? But I do think that plastics play a really big role in a lot of industries, maybe not on the single use side as much. But I'm curious how you think about that and how you weigh those sorts of things internally. And as you're thinking about, growth in the future, are you also thinking about things like that, or help me understand what it's like from your perspective to weigh those?
No, it's a really good question. First, I will say thank you, but I don't think of myself as successful, but I do think of myself as one of the few that made it to the starting line, which
That's fair.
is a privilege on its own, but we have a long way to go. Um, that is a phenomenal question. The harsh reality is that we at MicroCycle have very little to no power to be able to impact that.
Yeah.
Now, why is that the case? The reason plastics are used today is because they're the cheapest material that meet all the conditions to be able to be adopted in several applications. And especially as the world grows out of, the lower end poverties that we've had for history in many areas of the world, those individuals want to enjoy the same privileges. The way that we're going to reduce plastic consumption is by either prohibiting those group of peoples from adopting a better lifestyle or by inhibiting the current lifestyle that people have, which if it's not done economically by limiting the production of petrochemicals, there has to be a major behavioral change. And the
Hmm.
reality is, petrochemical is very ingrained in our society collectively, in many ways, shape, or form, for the better or the worse. It's both, to say the least. So, a microcycle, what can we do? Our goal is to essentially create a business model, a technology that is so economically attractive, where there's a massive and growing opportunity cost for other players to not adopt our technology.
Yeah.
If you make recycling so cheap that it's actually cheaper than petrochemical productions, people will stop using oil for for plastics.
Hmm.
Now, I actually wanted to ask you a question back.
Yeah.
High level, what are the major problems with using plastics today?
That's a great question. So here I'm going to take my stab. The breakdown in the process of recycling petrochemicals releases, I mean, I don't know whether they're like
You say
nano
chemicals.
plastics, right? Yeah, they release other chemicals and those can leach into the system and those can have like um hormonal effects and that sort of thing. So I understand that that's one of the challenges. The scope of that's really hard for me to figure out as someone who spends a lot of time in circularity and on LinkedIn and in different research studies. Knowing whether that actually affects human populations and how and to what degree is really confusing.
Yep.
So that's probably the main reason that I think about. And
Mhm.
then the other is like what you're already working toward, which is keeping things out of
Yep.
the natural environment.
So let me then ask you, the question is, if you prevent the leaching of plastics into our waterways by preventing them from the ocean, and you prevent them from being produced from petrochemicals, what is the problem with plastics?
You can you microwave them? There are
They
like
are.
certain heating applications, right, where you
Correct.
still might not.
So there are applications, they're limited. But if you do, but it's just like any tool or any things, they should be handled properly. Like for
Hmm.
example, if you put metals in microwaves, that's unsafe, but no one
Oh, so
says,
bad.
yeah, but no one says metals should not be used, right?
Yeah.
So like we have to think about it from the perspective. So like it's definitely an education part, but if materials are properly handled and you eliminate the production from petrochemicals and from them ever leaching into our environment, plastics now become a monumental asset that we can continue to take advantage of. And what we want to do is create a technology that eliminates plastics from being produced from oil and from ending up in our oceans so we can enjoy the benefits. When you look at the applications, let's think of like medical packaging or cars being lighter. Plastics have a lot of abundance benefits. I never believed this until I started working in the space, but I remember the CEO of ExxonMobil in the past telling us that plastic was good because for every ton of CO2 emissions that was released in making plastics, if it's used for food packaging, it will save 3 tons. So it had a
Yeah.
net positive. And like at the time, I didn't believe it. Now I'm like, well, there's other aspects that cannot be ignored, but in isolation, that is true. It is a benefit.
Yep.
So, although I also agree with plastics should be utilized less, I think it is best to say that plastics should be used smartly
Mm.
and with proper education, it can be managed properly. So that is our goal. That being said, I'll be transparent saying we won't be able to accomplish those goals until petrochemical and oil stops being used at the massive quantities that is being used today. Now, that was a long response, and I did ask you a question back,
No, no, no,
but
it's
that's
totally
my
fair.
overall perspective as to what is the reality of plastics and where I foresee it going into the future.
Yeah, I think that's really well articulated. And it's it's a dialogue that I want to be able to have, especially within like an MBA and sustainability program, is what I think that culturally speaking, we've done, at least I can say from like a US perspective, is we come up against these really hard and difficult topics, and especially ones where we've lost trust in organizations like BP and Exxon and folks like that. And we just want to run to the other direction because we want a really clear and easy and simple answer so that we don't continue to harm our communities and our children and that sort of thing. And so I understand the motivation, but the reality is that we have to be able to have complicated dialogue about complicated topics and to weigh those nuances, or we don't have a future in any sense. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness. Okay, well, to wrap up the chat, I'm curious what's next for MacroCycle. So you talked about how you're thinking about adjusting the business model. Is that happening right now? What's kind of next for you? And then let me know how Bard MBA students could get involved and how we can support you.
Thank you very much. So the change of the business model is currently undergoing, is currently happening. We're currently evaluating the options. We're going to be scaling up through the tolling, manufacturing, and are going to be making a key decision on whether we're going to focus all our resources into plastics or textiles. The reality is that if we do packaging or textiles, those are two different markets that are vast enough of their
Yeah.
own. So MacroCycle will need to focus on one of them. But what's next is MacroCycle validating our technology fully by creating the first product that we can show to the world, and selecting said market for us to then actually go back out to the market and go raise our Series A funding. We have been extremely fortunate and lucky to have been supported by great backers during our seed round of $6.5 million. And now that we're starting to meet those key milestones, we're going to go out back to the market to go raise our Series A, which is going to be a challenge of its own, but I am excited for said challenge. That funding will be utilized for us to scale up our manufacturing even farther to reach industrial scale. So we can then provide the products to our customers, have product launches to validate that it works commercially, receive those offtake agreements, so we can then start raising the capital stack required for us to build our Series B facility. So that's going to be a long journey ahead, but we're excited to, chug, by one bottle, one t-shirt at a time to get there. How can the greater community help? So the reality is we just are going to need continuous support. And that is in direct and indirect ways. Indirect ways, I will say, just start recycling. Like a lot of the plastic that you put in your bins doesn't actually end up recycled, but part of it is because it's a self-serving loop where they're not getting enough access to clean material, so they haven't invested in the infrastructure. But if we start providing them more and more access, if every person recycles one more bottle every single day, that can make a significant big impact for infrastructure to start developing, which will make my job easier down the line as well. Second of all, follow us on LinkedIn. Is MacroCycle Technologies. That really helps us just be able to get our word out, and you never know, by you liking our post, who might see it from your network that might be able to help us. And then three, if there's any way you can directly connect us to any packaging, textile brands, or investors that you're aware of that are interested in this, I am always happy to talk to more members. After all, I'm a true believer that's going to be an all hands on deck approach for us to be able to resolve this crisis. So I will say those are the three main ways that any individual can help us indirectly and directly. But otherwise, it's going to be a long journey. We just got to buckle down and at least enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, we're MBA students, so we like homework. Thank you for the homework, Stwart. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time. And we'll continue to spread the word.
The pleasure and honor is mine. Until next time.